Inside of today's video, we're going to be ranking all 128 gadgets in the game from the very worst all the way up to the very best. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. First up, we have Shelly's gadgets, Fast Forward and Clay Pigeon. So Fast Forward isn't really a good gadget whatsoever. Only really helps you in a few scenarios and it's just really slow and awkward, whilst Clay Pigeons is actually so strong for her build. That's why I'm putting Shelly's Fast Forward in the D tier and then Clay Pigeons in the A tier. Next up, we have Nita's gadgets. So the first one is Bear Paws. It's only a quick stun. For the most part, you only get a couple of swipes off onto the opponent, whilst Faux Fur actually offers a lot of tanking and can waste the enemy's ammo quite a fair bit. That's why I'm putting Nita's stun gadget into the D tier, and then the shield gadget probably in the B or C tier. It's decent for wasting ammo but doesn't really offer the most value. So next up, we have Colt's gadget. So the first gadget is going to make you instantly reload a couple of pieces of ammo, only really good in a few rare scenarios, while Silver Bullet will really help you break open the map, especially on some maps like Safe Zone. So for me, Speed Loader has to probably go in the D tier because I don't really use it too often, and then Silver Bullet has to be like an A tier gadget. It's so good at breaking open the map and giving you more ways to attack the enemy safe. Next up, we have Bull's gadgets, T-Bone Ejector, which gives you 1500 HP instantly. Isn't really the best, while Stomper really helps you confirm kills and instantly stops your super. So I'm putting T-Bone Injector into the C tier and then Stomper into the A tier. It really helps Bull actually take out targets. So next up, we have Brock's two gadgets. Rocket Laces is good in some scenarios, especially against any assassins, so you can help knock them back. It will also survive certain scenarios, but Rocket Fuel is going to be the better gadget overall. It's just so good at breaking terrain and also at confirming kills. So I'm putting Rocket Laces in the B tier, could possibly put it in the C tier, but I know a lot of people really like the gadget, but Rocket Fuel has to be in the S tier. Next up, we have El Primo. He has two kind of weird gadgets. None of them really is the strongest. Suplex Supplement really does help him against, you know, fellow tanks, especially brawlers like BB, for example. And then Asteroid Belt sometimes can be okay, but sometimes can actually hurt El Primo. So that's why I'm putting the first gadget probably in the B tier. It's actually really good, especially against fellow tanks. Can keep enemy brawlers in like a stun lock. Then Asteroid Belt probably put towards the D or C tier. Probably put it towards the C tier. Next up, we have Barley's two gadgets. So the first one is Sticky Syrup Mixer. This really helps not only countering tanks but also just any brawler. It really helps to confirm a kill every single time. Then Herbal Tonic. This gadget used to be really good a few years ago, but I feel like it's really lackluster right now. So that's why I'm putting Barley's first gadget into the A tier and then the healing into the C tier, but I feel like with a little buff could definitely be a lot higher. Next up, we have Poco's gadgets. So start off with a Tuning Fork. It offers 400 healing per second for 5 seconds to you and your nearby teammates. It's actually really good at the start of I don't know, say you've conceded Brawl, it's really good at getting some pressure. And then Protective Tunes used to be the worst gadget in the game, but it's actually really good against some brawlers like Crow's gadget. So I'm putting Tuning Fork into the A tier because it's super valuable in pretty much every single scenario. And then Protective Tunes is only really good in draft in certain scenarios, so it has to be in the D tier. So next up, we have Roses. So Grow Light helps you plant bushes around the map. Can be really good in certain scenarios where you can connect bushes and make it really hard for the enemies to know where you are. And then you have Unfriendly Bushes, which slows opponents when they're inside of bushes. So two pretty useful gadgets for Rosa. So for me, both of these gadgets have to be in the B tier. They definitely have its uses in most scenarios. I feel like the Grow Light is a little bit better just because it's usable on more maps, but overall both of them have a big impact. So next up, we have Jessie's gadget. Spark Plug is definitely needed for her build. It allows you to confirm kills so easily once you have her turret up. Of course, you gotta wait until you get his turret, which takes a long time with Jessie sometimes. And then Recall Springs, only really good in Heist, can sometimes be useful. So for that reason, I have to put Spark Plug in the A tier because I just feel like it really cripples the enemy and allows you to really do something with Jessie, whilst Recall Springs only really good in Heist. And for the most part, skilled players can just take down the turret pretty quickly. So next up with Dynamite, we have one of the worst gadgets in the game and one of the best gadgets in the game. So Fidget Spinner is pretty much useless. It's only really useful to escape brawlers like Mortis, and then Satchel Charge is so OP. So for me, Fidget Spinner unfortunately has to go into the F tier, but Satchel Charge has to be in the S tier. So another thrower and the same type of story, because my mania for me is just a terrible gadget. I get zero value out of it, but then Last Hurrah is just completely made for tick, one of the best gadgets in the game. So for me, that's why we have my mania at F tier. at higher trophies, at higher elo, I just never see this gadget whatsoever. And then last Hurrah is just so good at tanking so many different things and also pushing back enemy tanks. Next up we have 8-bit. So 8-bit's got two useful gadgets definitely throughout the game mode. So cheat cartridge is used pretty much everywhere except for heist. It's really good at escaping, especially in gem grab. When you want to collect a few gems, you can use the gadget to go back to your turret, but of course you have to have your turret in a safe place, whilst extra credits is insane in heist, especially when paired with his boosted booster style power. So both gadgets have its good uses, but for me, just because you can use cheat cartridge on any game mode pretty much, I've got to put it in a B tier, and then extra credits in a C tier, but for heist it's definitely needed for 8-bit. So next up we have Rico's gadget. So multi-ball launcher is one of the worst gadgets within the game. It barely gets any damage onto anyone, whereas we have Bouncy Castle, where this gadget literally broke Rico. He used to be the best brawler in the game, well, one of the best brawlers in the game with this gadget. They slowly nerfed it a little bit, but still I think it's so useful with Rico. So that's why, again, multiple launcher, I just think it's just terrible. Never use it. And then Bouncy Castle is one of the best gadgets in the game. So good at applying pressure and winning your lane so easily with this gadget. So next up we have Daryl. So Daryl's got two pretty weak gadgets. I would say Recoil and Rotator used to only be useful in heist, but I've started to use it in other game modes now because I feel like Daryl kind of gets pressured too easily without his first super, especially whilst Tar Barrel is actually really useful at confirming kills. Both gadgets are still pretty weak though. So that's why I got to put both gadgets probably in the C tier. Both of them are decent and add somewhat some usefulness to Daryl's kit, but you can definitely play without her. So now moving on to Penny. She has one of the best gadgets in the game in Salty Barrel. So good at so many different things. If you still have Salty Barrel like available throughout the game, a lot of brawlers can't go aggro on you because you can pretty much one-shot or two-shot them with this gadget in hand. And then Trusty Spyglass, I don't think I've ever used this gadget. I don't think it really has much use. So Penny's Salty Barrel 100% has to be at the S tier, one of the best gadgets in the game. And then Trusty Spyglass probably in the F tier or the D tier, but I just never use it. Probably overshined a lot by her first gadget. Next up we have Cole's gadget. So we've got Heat Ejector. Has literally always been one of the worst gadgets in the game. An extra 1200 damage is going to do nothing for you, whilst Flying Hook literally makes Cole a meta brawler and one of the best brawlers within the game, so it's just absolutely needed. So for me, Heat Ejector has to be in the F tier. Just never even consider using it. And then Flying Hook, 100%, you need this gadget on Cole. Next up we have Jackie's gadget. So the first one is Pneumatic Booster. I believe it just gives you an extra bit of speed for 3 seconds, which can be really decent, especially closing the gap between you and your opponents. You know, she has no range, so that gadget is definitely needed. And we have Rebuild, actually one of the worst gadgets in the game, but at least it's sometimes useful, especially on maps like Super Beach, where if they destroy 2 of those walls, at least you can rebuild them and you can be a lot more dangerous on the field because of it. So for that, I'm putting Jackie's first gadget probably in the B, maybe even A tier, because it really helps close the gap and actually allows you to get a kill. Whilst Rebuild is actually in the D tier, could potentially be F tier, but I think at least in competitive, in draft, you can still get some use out of this gadget. Next up we have Gus. So again, he has one of the best gadgets in the game and then one of the worst gadgets in the game. So Kooky Popper is one of the best gadgets in the game, allows you to confirm kills so easily. If then you have Soul Switcher, I just really don't see the point in it. It's very useless. So we're absolutely putting Kooky Popper into the S tier. It's definitely needed for Gus's build. Allows him to survive against assassins a little bit easier. And then Soul Switcher 100% has to be in F tier. It's just useless. Next up we have Bo's gadgets. So the first one is Super Totem. This gadget has always been a little bit cheesy, but right now in this meta, this gadget is broken in knockouts. So you just definitely need it if you're looking to push both. And Tripwire is a little bit difficult to get value out of it, but sometimes can be useful and can catch enemies by surprise. So just because how good Gray and Jackie are in knockout right now, that combination, maybe even S tier for this gadget. It literally makes that comp viable, giving Gray a free super, being able to teleport onto anyone, get a free kill. It's just super cheesy. So right now in this meta, maybe into the S tier, but overall probably A tier. And then Tripwire, don't really get too much value out of this gadget personally. Other people do prefer it, but I'll put it towards the D or even a C tier. Next up we have M. So we have Friend Zoner, which really allows her to counter some of her counters. Without it, she's just so easy to get on top of, you know, like brawlers like Mortis and Buzz will just destroy her. Whilst Acid Spray, I thought this gadget was going to be low-key really broken when it was first released, but I just never seen any use for it. So for me, I have to put Friend Zoner in probably be A or B tier. She's really good with it, of course, countering those aggressive brawlers. And then Acid Spray could even be in the F tier, but I'd have to put it in the D tier. So now moving on to Stu. Stu has two really strong gadgets, definitely helps him out on multiple maps and scenarios. So Speed Zone is going to be insane in Hot Zone, definitely needed, gives you and your team extra speed, of course makes it easy to juke but also hit shots. And then Breakthrough can really help him surprise the opponent and be super aggressive. Both of these gadgets are really strong. So for me, that's why I got to put both of these gadgets in the A tier. Both can be extremely dangerous for the enemy to deal with. So next up we have Piper. So she's got two useful gadgets. You got Auto Aimer in case the enemies go on an aggressive brawler like Mortis. It really helps you knocking them back. And then with Homemade Recipe, it's super strong, especially on Bounty. You can basically get a free kill every single time. So for me, Auto Aimer probably has to be in the C or D tier just because it isn't often used, but still pretty useful in draft, as I said, if an aggro brawler faces off against you. But Homemade Recipe definitely has to be in the S tier. It's so incredibly strong and so easy to hit. So now moving on to Pam's gadgets. So we have Pulse Modulator, which I don't think I've ever used since Scrap Sucker has came out. So just pretty useless. 1200 healing with your turret isn't really too much, not going to help you out in any situation, whereas Scrap Sucker just completely hard counters any brawler that is close to Pam. There's no answer to it, so for me, there's no doubt which one's the best gadget. So personally, Pulse Modulator has to be in the F tier for me. There's just never ever a consideration for it. I've not seen it used for years now, and Scrap Sucker has to be S tier. She literally hard counters, especially aggro brawlers. It just makes you delete them. So next up we have Frank. So active noise cancelling is actually a really strong gadget, but it's nearly never used unless maybe you're facing off against a Tara or something that's certain to stun lock you pretty much all of the time. But I would say 9 times out of 10, Irresistible Attraction is the better gadget just because that extra damage will really help you out as a friend. So for me, I've got to put Frank's first gadget probably in the C tier, but definitely could be B tier just because of well, which gadget I use the most. The second gadget, I use it way more than the other one, so it's got to be a bit higher. So now moving on to BB, the first one, Vitamin Booster. Really good because especially when you're taking damage, you can still heal up, which allows you to keep up the pressure, whilst extra sticky, I don't think I've ever considered using, and it's just so hard to get value out of it. So for me, BB's first gadget has to be in the A tier, pretty much use that all of the time, really helps her stay alive. And then her new gadget, I just don't see anyone use it literally ever, even in ladder matches. It's just terrible. Next up we have B. So first gadget is Honey Molasses. Really useful with B, but that can be really annoying for the enemies to deal with, but it doesn't really improve B's kit overall too much. And then Rattled Hive, pretty much unusable everywhere, especially considering there's a bug with it now. It's just pretty useless. So for me, Honey Molasses has to be towards a B tier, even potentially A tier, and Rattled Hive D or F tier. Maybe in some scenarios you wouldn't use the first gadget, so you know, it might be a little bit used, so that's why it has to be in a D tier. So next up we have Nanny. So she's actually got two really useful gadgets for the way that you play her, especially in competitive. Warp Blast is really going to help you out, especially in heist. The way you play her, you get your Nanny peeps and then you can start teleporting behind enemy lines and be really annoying, whilst Return to Sender is so broken, especially in Bounty. Both gadgets really complement. So for me, I'd have to put Return to Sender in the S tier. Honestly, in Bounty, specifically Shooting Star, this gadget is so strong, especially against single shot brawlers. You just can't do anything against it. There's hardly any counterplay except for, of course, not hitting Nanny, but if they time it right, you're basically dead every single time. Whilst Warp Blast, is it Warp Blast? Yeah, Warp Blast is pretty decent overall. Won't really be the best, but still pretty good in heist. Next up, we have Edgar. So Let's Fly basically gives you a free super, so can definitely help you get into the fight much quicker. But then without his hardcore, you're pretty squishy. But then if you use this gadget, you know, you're getting a little bit of extra HP, but then you're like a sitting duck. You're waiting for your super for so long. So both gadgets are okay in most scenarios, but definitely has its weakness. So for me, both gadgets would probably be in the C or B tier, probably in the B tier because it definitely does help Edgar out, but doesn't really make him too much of a better brawler. Next up, we have Griff. So Piggy Bank, one of the best gadgets in the game, so good at breaking open the map, and the main reason why Griff is actually anywhere close to the meta right now. And then we have Coin Shower, which is basically useless. I don't get why it's even in the game. That's why for me, Piggy Bank has to be in the S tier. It's so good at breaking open so many different maps, especially in Brawl. It literally can create the game into your favor, and then Coin Shower just has to be in the F tier. Never ever contemplate using it. Next up we have Grom. So the first gadget, Watchtower, is actually insane on grassy maps, but then you've got to take into account you can only use it on grassy maps. So yeah, of course on maps like center stage it's going to be completely broken. And then Radio Check actually is a really strong gadget now they've buffed his projectile speed. You know, a lot of times you can deal like 6k damage pretty much instantly, and especially in heist it's really strong as well. So definitely two really strong gadgets with Grom. So for me, Watchtower has to be probably in the C/B tier because it's just so valuable on grassy maps, and then Radio Check has to be in the A tier for me because you can just get so much damage off so quickly. So now moving on to Bonnie, starting off with Sugar Rush. Sugar Rush is really strong. It gives you additional movement speed and reload speed, so definitely useful for a brawler like Bonnie because you're super slow and haven't got the quickest reload. And then Crash Test, a pretty useless gadget. I just don't think I've ever used it. So for me, Sugar Rush has to be like an S or an A tier gadget. For me, S tier, just because without it, I feel like Bonnie is probably a little bit too easy to hit, and that increased movement speed just allows you to get so much pressure. And then Crash Test just absolutely has to be in the F tier. You just get zero value out of it. So next up we have Mortis. The first one is Combo Spinner. Really good gadget, especially when you have no ammo. It can help get you a quick kill. But everyone uses Survival Shovel, especially at the higher ranks, because it gives you the increased reload speed, allows you to get around the map much quicker. But not only that, it will help you charge up your bats quicker in turn, and just overall a lot more useful. So for me, Combo Spinner has to be in and around the B/C tier, pretty useful overall. And then the second gadget has to be in the A tier. It's so good at being able to just control and go around the map much easier. Next up we have Tara. So her first gadget is only really good in game modes, well, maps like Snake Prairie, where there's just a ton of grass. I don't really see anyone use it apart from that map. And then Support from Beyond used to be really strong, but definitely Tara will be a little bit too easy to take down without this gadget. So it's really strong, especially against those single shot brawlers. So for me, Support from Beyond has to be somewhere near the A tier, even potentially S tier, because I feel Tara is just too squishy without it. Then Psychic Enhancer has to be in the D tier. So now moving on to Jean. Lamp Blowout is the first gadget. It's pretty much usable everywhere. So good, especially if an aggro brawler is coming up against you. But not only that, it's good to buy you a little bit of time, especially if you pulse one towards you, and get you a little bit of extra HP as well. Vengeful Spirit's only really good on long range maps, but still then it's still quite lackluster. So for me, Lamp Blowout has to be somewhere around the A tier. You know, Jean is pretty hard to use without it. And then Vengeful Spirits, just because it's only really usable on the open maps, has to be in the C tier, and it only deals up to 1000 damage. Next up we have Max. So Phase Shifter is one of the best gadgets in the game for me. It allows you to make so many aggressive plays, and you're literally invincible whilst making that dash. While Sneaky Sneakers, again, I've just never seen this gadget used ever since its introduction. One of the most pointless gadgets in the game. So for me, Phase Shifter has to absolutely be in the S tier. Without it, Max just isn't as aggressive. And then Sneaky Sneakers is just never a scenario where I want to use this gadget, and it just, the whole concept of it is just pretty backwards. Next up we have Mr. P's gadgets. While Service Bell seems okay, but doesn't really help him out too much, just gives the Porter an extra 1000 HP, and then Porter Reinforcements just spawns a little Porter next to the opponents, but it's just so easy to take down. So for me, Service Bell has to be probably in a C, maybe even D tier. Doesn't really help out Mr. P whatsoever. 1000 HP extra to Porter isn't really going to help out too much. And then Porter Reinforcements, you know, it's the tiniest Porter ever. It really does nothing. So now moving on to Sprout. The first one is Garden Mulcher. So every bit of grass you're near, you can press the gadget and it will heal you up for 1500. You only have 3 uses to it. It only helps you out in a few scenarios. Maybe if you want to go aggressive against like an enemy tick or thrower, can really help you out in a 1v1. But overall, Transplant is by far the better gadget and can really help you spawn trap opponents and put them into an uncomfortable position. So for me, Garden Mulcher has to be towards D/C tier. You know, it's sometimes useful. A little bit of extra HP, of course, it's going to be a useful gadget. And then Transplant for me has to be maybe even an A tier gadget. I just think it makes Sprout so good and so annoying. Now moving on to Byron. So Shot in the Arm allows him to heal up a lot more. Can actually be pretty useful most of the time, but pretty much all the pros use boosted shots just because it allows you to hit shots, of course, a lot easier, but also build up your super and allow you to keep cycling through those supers over and over again. So overall, I've got to put the first gadget probably in the C tier or maybe the B tier, probably towards the C tier, just because it's not really used too much in competitive. and then the other gadget probably in the B tier, just because it's just so easy to hit a shot with this gadget. So now moving on to Squeak's gadgets. The first one is called Wind Up, so it gives you 100% longer range. Can sometimes be good in some scenarios, you know, if you want to destroy like an enemy turret, I don't know, like a Leon Lollipop or like a Stu speed gadget can be really good in that scenario, but overall not really used at all, because Residue is by far the better gadget, and without this gadget, Squeak is one of the worst brawlers in the game. So for me, Wind Up has to be towards the D tier, just never really consider using it, and then Residue has to be all the way up into the S tier, one of the best gadgets in the game. So next up we have Grey. So Walking Cane has always been an underrated gadget since the nerf to Grand Piano. It's actually by far the better gadget overall, especially if someone is behind a wall. You can actually deal damage to them, break open a wall, and should be an easy kill. Grand Piano used to be the best gadget in the game by far. It's still pretty useful in some scenarios, but often overshadowed now by Walking Cane. So for me, I'll put Walking Cane in the A/B tier. Definitely can be pretty useful for Grey overall. And then Grand Piano probably in the B tier. Does look really small, but at least it provides a wall break, and wall break is just so strong in the meta. Next up we have Spike. So popping pin cushions used to be pretty strong in Heist like 2 or 3 years ago. Never used it anymore, and one of the worst gadgets in the game, I think. And then Life Plan actually really helps out Spike. It essentially gives him an extra 2700 HP and so strong against single shot brawlers. So that's why we have popping pin cushions in the F tier, just unusable, never used even in Heist. And then Life Plan I'd actually put towards the A tier, even since it's nerf. I just think it's so valuable for Spike. Next up we have Crow. So Defensive Booster has just never been used in competitive, but it's still overall an okay gadget, especially if you've got super to hand. It can make it pretty hard for the enemies to deal with you. But Slowing Toxin, even since its nerf, used to be 5 seconds slow, now it's free. It's still absolutely one of the best gadgets in the game. So Defensive Booster, just because of its use rate, probably put towards like the C tier. Even in most scenarios, I just wouldn't really imagine using it, but Slowing Toxin has to be in the S tier. It's so valuable for his build. Next up, we have Leon. So Leon's Clone Projector, I've just never used whatsoever. Probably only good against single shot brawlers. I think only in competitive I've seen it used in Shooting Star. Maybe if you're up against like a Piper, and a Nanny can be okay, but Lollipop Drop is pretty much usable all of the time, everywhere. By far the better gadget. So for me, Clone Projector has to be somewhere near the D tier. Only really usable in Showdown. I just don't like it whatsoever. And then in the S tier, I think Lollipop Drop. It gives invisibility to you and your teammates. It's just so hard to deal with. So now moving on to Sandy. Sandy's first gadget gives you the ability to heal up fully, but you have to stand still within that moment, and for that reason he's just too vulnerable. Never seen it used since Sweet Dreams got introduced. One of the best gadgets in the game. Just the ability to stun people is just so vital, and for me that's why Sandy's first gadget has to be in the D tier. The fact that it just keeps you in like standing still for 2 seconds, it just makes it such an easy target. And then the Sandy second gadget has to be in the S or A tier. Even though Sandy's a bad brawler, the gadget is so strong. Next up we have Amber, and she has one really good gadget and one terrible. So 5 starters is so strong, especially combined with Wild Flames. It allows you to start cycling your supers. Not only that, you get additional movement speed, and Amber, when she's sped up, just makes it so hard for the opponents to deal with. And then Dancing Flames is just so terrible. One of the worst gadgets that's ever been released. So for me, 5 starters has to be in the A tier. The additional movement speed and the ability to cycle super literally makes Amber the brawler she is. And then 5 starters, F tier, absolutely. The next up we have Mech. So the first gadget allows you to heal up whilst in your mech. It's especially good in game modes like Hot Zone, keeping you alive and on that zone for much longer, making it just even harder for the enemies to deal with. Toolbox it is pretty much a pointless gadget. I do actually see it used a few times in Power League at the moment, but still overall, I think the other gadget is just way better. So for me, the first gadget has to be A tier. Just getting that additional healing whilst in your mech is so strong. And then Toolbox probably towards a D tier. It's only really good for tanking like a B3K shot or just tanking a single shot brawler. So now moving on to Chester. So Chester's gadgets I thought were pretty strong, especially before he was released, but over time I think both gadgets are a bit lackluster. The first one, Spicy Dice, can be pretty good, you know, if you have a really bad super like the one that has like a freezing zone. It can be good just to swap off it because that one's pretty useless. And then Candy Beans is sometimes okay, but for the most part just don't think it gives you a good enough buff. So for Chester's gadgets, I'll probably both put them towards the C tier. The Dice one for me is a little bit better because at least you can get off a really terrible super. Next up, we have Gale. So moving on to the chromatics. Spring ejector is only really used in a few scenarios. Maybe if the opponent is trying to counter a Gale. I don't know, I've seen it sometimes used against like a Sprout, for example, or on a map like Parallel Place to get across the water. But other than that, it's not really used too often, whilst Twister will literally completely hard counter so many assassin brawlers like Mortis, Buzz. It makes it so hard to take down an enemy Gale when you're an assassin when he has this gadget. So for me, I'd have to put Spring Ejector towards the D tier, maybe C tier, because at least you can jump across the water with it and get you back into the fight much quicker. And then Twister has to be like an S tier, maybe an A tier, probably A tier since the nerf, but when it was 10 seconds, absolutely S tier. So now moving on to Surge, both his gadgets are really powerful. The first one, Power Surge, gives you an increased surge level for 10 seconds, especially good against the high skill cap players because they really know how to keep you at that first stage. And then Power Shield is so incredibly strong in ladder and so strong against more tanky oppositions where it can start being really aggressive. Both gadgets are really powerful. So for Surge, I'd have to put both of these gadgets in the A tier. So useful for him, and both of them make him incredibly strong. Now moving on to Colette. So the first gadget can sometimes be useful in some scenarios, but overall Gotcha is just going to be way better at keeping alive, especially in synergy with her mass attack style power. Can just make it so hard for the enemies to take you down. So Colette's first gadget has to be somewhere in the D/C tier. Never seen it used because it's just so overshadowed by Gotcha, but Gotcha has to be an S tier gadget. It's so strong. So now we have Lu. We have Ice Block, which is sometimes good at tanking, maybe like a B 3k shot where you know you're dead, so you have to tank it, but still you're having to stand still and it's pretty hard to get ultimate value out of it, whilst Syrup is so good, especially once you first throw a super onto the opponent. Given a 50% additional freeze is so good and helps you cycle that freeze stun. So for me, Ice Block has to be in the D tier. You know, sometimes you can get value out of it and it can be a surprise factor, but overall it's pretty hard to actually work out. And then the other gadget has to be A tier. So now moving on to Ruffs. Both gadgets can be pretty useful. Take Cover used to be by far the best gadget in the game, well, one of the best gadgets in the game because of how much HP it had. It just doesn't really do too much right now. Still a good counter to brawlers like Surge. And then Air Support, just because if Ruffs doesn't face off against, you know, like a Surge, you're going to want to switch to this one. It really helps you win your lane, but overall doesn't like accumulate to a lot of damage. So I'd have to put Sandbags probably in the B tier because it can really help him out in some scenarios. And then Air Support in the C tier. It's actually a pretty decent gadget overall, but still doesn't actually help him out too much. Next up we have Bell. So Nest Egg is a pretty strong gadget, especially in game modes like Hot Zone or Bounty. You know, if you got the lead, they're pretty much certain to walk into an egg and you can pretty much get a kill every single time. Reverse Polarity can sometimes be a little bit dangerous to use, but definitely high risk, high reward. So for me, I'd have to put Nest Egg in the B/A tier, probably towards the A tier because at least it can confirm a kill every time. And then Reverse Polarity probably in the C tier. I do use this gadget most of the time, but to be honest, I only use it to be flashy. So now moving on to Buzz, we have his first gadget, which a lot of people don't really rate too much, but I think it really allows him to maneuver around the map a lot quicker. I really like Buzz, and without it, I just feel a little bit stuck in the mud sometimes, especially if you miss a hook. X-ray shades can be really useful on super bushy maps, but of course, you pretty much know that someone's in and around that area just because they'll be automatically charging your super. So personally, I'd actually put Buzz's first gadget towards the A/even S tier because without it, I just feel like I can't play Buzz. And then X-ray shades are actually really powerful on maps like Sneaky Field, but overall only really useful on grassy maps. I'm moving on to Ash's gadget. Starting off with Chill Pill can really help him out and stay alive in certain scenarios, especially if you have that full rage. 2500 HP, it's actually quite a lot. And then Rotten Banana, it's just plain and simple terrible. So for me, I'm putting Chill Pill in the A tier. Definitely a really strong gadget to have. And Rotten Banana, it's rotten, it's in the F tier. Next up we have Lola. So Freeze Frame used to be one of the best gadgets in the game. The nerf actually hurt it a lot more than I thought. Still a pretty useful gadget overall. And then Stunt Double feels a little bit awkward to use and only really usable on a few maps. So personally, I'd have to put Freeze Frame in the A tier, but definitely could be an S tier one as well. And then Stunt Double, a little bit awkward for me, probably in the D/C tier, probably put it towards the C tier. So next up we have Fang. So Corn Fu, it feels like and it looks like it should do something, but doesn't actually really do too much, just maybe keeps the opponents away for a few seconds, whilst Roundhouse Kick really helps Fang thrive. Stunning the opponents, allowing you to maybe get an extra shot off, is super vital. So for me, Corn Fu probably has to be towards the D tier. Honestly, it just does nothing. And then roundhouse kick, probably towards the A/S tier. I'll probably put it in the S tier just because the stun is such a broken mechanic to have. So now moving on to Eve. So Gotta Go is really good at surviving certain scenarios. You know, if an aggro brawler gets on top of you, you can use this gadget and jump on top of the water and get you away. Whilst Motherly Love, I just don't see any use for it. It's really awkward to actually get any value out. So for me, Gotta Go has to be in towards the A tier/B tier. It's so useful for Eve. And then Motherly Love has to be in the F tier. It's literally pointless. So next up we have Janet. Both gadgets are really useful. Some of the best gadgets in the game. Drop the Base is so strong on grassy maps and just stopping the regen from the opponents. It's really annoying to face off against. Definitely an S tier gadget. Then Backstage Pass, it does get overshadowed a little bit by the first gadget, but it's also such a useful gadget, especially when you're looking to go really aggressive and especially against like throwers, for example. So for me, Drop the Base has to be an S tier gadget, and then Backstage Pass an A tier gadget. So now moving on to Otis. Dormant Star, it seemed like it might be OP when it first came out. Doesn't really do anything, never used it. The second gadget is so strong, especially just stopping people regenning and also stopping them from coming into the grass, for example. So for me, Otis's first gadget has to be D tier. It's really hard to get value out of it. It's just pretty awkward overall. And then his second gadget is so strong in so many scenarios, has to be A tier. So now moving on to Sam. He has one really strong gadget and one pretty awkward gadget. Magnetic Field allows you to basically like stun them and then freeze them into where your super is. Really good at confirming kills. Then Pulse Repellent just feels really awkward and actually knocks opponents away from you. I don't know, I just don't like this gadget. So Sam's first gadget has to be like A tier, maybe even S tier. A really strong gadget to have. And then his second gadget is just terrible, maybe even F tier, probably towards the D tier. So next up we have Buster. So his first gadget used to be really useful when it first came out. I feel like it got nerfed heavily, and right now just don't see too much use for it. Not a lot of healing on that side of things, but then slow-mo replay is just so crazy strong. So the first gadget has to be in and around the B/C tier, just pretty hard to get much value out of it. And then slow-mo replay has to be an S tier gadget. It's so strong at confirming kills. And finally moving on to Mandy then. So both gadgets are pretty useful sometimes, but still with both of these gadgets you have to actually hit your shot, which can sometimes be hard with Mandy. So Caramelize helps you slow opponents, really good against tanky brawlers, especially on ladder. You'll face a lot of tanky brawlers. Then you have Cookie Crumbs, can sometimes be really good in game modes like Knockout, where an opponent is one shot behind a wall, can be pretty useful. It's also a really good counter to the cheesy bow strategy that's going on in Knockout. So finally then, Mandy's slow gadget has to be towards the B tier, maybe even A, really good slow. And then her new gadget, I'd actually put in a B tier as well. I think it's pretty underrated and can actually be pretty strong in some circumstances. Alright guys, that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this one. Feel free to take a screenshot of this one. I feel like it's pretty accurate overall. A lot of these will just be my feelings though. A lot of people might feel differently about these gadgets. You know, some of these brawlers aren't the best in the game. You know, for example, Sandy, but we still have a really strong gadget. Overall, I'll just avoid the F tier ones, D tier ones as much as possible and try and get all of the A tier and S tier ones because they'll really help you out in your games. So that's going to be it for today's video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.